Hey, what's going on, everybody? We're back with a really cool question here. It says, can hypnosis really be used to create generative change? It seems to be used most commonly to solve remedial problems. How does all this work if we're just going into the past and working through those situations? So this is great. So, okay, I get the gist of the question here. I think there's a lot of really cool work out there on the subject of generative change. I suppose the big nuance here that I want to point out, you know, if you've worked with a lot of smokers and clients, you might hear things like, once I solve this problem with smoking, I've already made so many other changes in my life. This is the one thing holding me back. It's almost as if that client has in their mind that once they quit smoking, they're really going to go out there and actualize their potential. Which sounds great, right? Why would you not? It seems like that would be motivation for them to pursue the thing. And in some ways it is, but the mind is kind of in a troublesome spot. Um, so think about it like this: that remedial problem is safe, and safety is a primary need human beings have. Right? We need to fulfill that. We need that sense of certainty. So to the extent the safe problem of smoking, even though it's literally killing them, is something that's familiar, a lot of times they won't put that away because stepping out into the world and actualizing their potential, there's certain risks associated with that. It could go wrong, they might fail. So there's all these unarticulated presuppositions and tacit assumptions that someone has underneath the surface. So literally just by working through that remedial problem, you start to produce generative outcomes a lot of times with folks. It's incredible. So yes and no, right? You could pursue like a generative thing on its own, but I think the big point of this video that I want to get across is by helping people work through those remedial problems, there's all these generative outcomes available to them. And it's pretty cool. And the other big point to summarize here is like, is this a safe problem for your client in some ways? Is hanging on to the something, you've heard the term secondary gain, I'm sure. And so what's really going on here? And at the end of the day, a lot of folks will have like very complicated conversations and discussions about like which model is more correct, which model is wrong. And I think there's some real value in thinking through those things. They can help clarify your thinking and maybe like look at the world in a more effective way and more productive way. But ultimately, to the extent we get really, really stuck in the classification of phenomena, classification of models, being which one's more true than the other, um, and looking at like different techniques and modalities, all that type of stuff. The big thing I just want you to be aware of is if you have all that in your mind, there's a chance you might be missing all the incredible phenomena that client is just telling you. Literally, the unconscious mind is communicating constantly, right? So if you can learn to see it, to kind of discern it and utilize it, the client can produce everything they need from a generative change standpoint. It doesn't really matter what you talk about per se. I experience this all the time, and my students do too. Talk about all kinds of wild stuff, but you're more paying attention to the unconscious communication, noticing it, utilizing that client's awareness, drawing it to it, giving them the space they need to create the resources necessary to get an outcome, right? To make a change, to create some new learnings and understandings, new choice. So when you're working in this way, you're not really as stuck on models. Models kind of are just things they're fun to talk about, and there's some learning there, but ultimately the real mastery and learning comes from the ability to sort of quiet all that in your mind and just really observe that person in front of you and developing the skill and ability to understand that way, and then to be able to utilize whatever that client's unconscious mind presents. So I know that's probably a little bit out there and maybe a bit of a different direction than what you're expecting with that question, but I think it's really important to consider. I'm not going to sit here and say that distinction between remedial and generative isn't useful. Please don't misunderstand that. I just think if you become very skilled at utilizing that client's unconscious communication, There's still a usefulness in that distinction, but now it's like you're not really going to be stuck trying to solve a remedial problem and then, okay, now let's produce some generative change. It can just all happen at once. Because it's all coming from that individual, right? We don't even know the real problem. We just have the presenting problem when we start. But as we explore, we can get really close to whatever's really going on there. And then their mind has all the power it needs to do the work at the appropriate level to make these changes, right? So it's really great because it takes the pressure off of us. It's a fun way to work. So anyway, yep, that's it, folks, for this video. If you have more questions, please follow up. I love answering these. Take care, everybody.